Hi guys, this is Niman Kenkre for BlueFirePoker.com, and for today's video we are going to do some more hands. I did I guess a part one of this series in which I analyzed a few of my hands. No particular theme, just hands that had various instructional components to them. I'm going to do some more today in a part two. Probably will be the last part, although I might have enough hands to do a part three if it's well received. So obviously give me your feedback as always. Probably be a good idea if you looked at the first part one before, but as opposed to my playing videos, it's not really necessary. You could just jump right into here. So we start the action here in a 10-20 deep game with 250 big blind buy-in, in which the play of my hand is very player dependent, and I'm going to speak specifically about the tendencies of the player that allow me to play this way. So the blinds are 10-20 with an ante of $4 per man, and it folds around to Kung Fu Monk on the button, and he opens for a min raise. Take chip calls out of the small blind, and I'm in there with 7-6 suited in the big blind. Obviously, I'm going to call this. I guess a squeeze here is a reasonable play, but I don't think it's great in this spot because Kung Fu Monk is the type of player who calls with a lot of he defends his button very, very wide, and then sort of he's a little bit like he'll call once, and so I'm going to need to fire 2 barrels to get him off of something decent, and my hand is there's a lot of flops that aren't going to hit my hand very hard, and it's going to be a little bit with the type of hand that I have, it's going to be a little bit difficult to decide whether I can effectively double barrel. Putting that in concord with the fact that take chip is a very tight player, especially out of position. So when he calls, even though it was just a min raise, when he calls for 30 more in the big blind, in the small blind, he's going to have a pretty legitimate range there, and he's an excellent player. So I think my hand plays better just keeping the pot small for now. Of course, I've talked many times in my videos over the years about how squeezing should be done with sort of the best hands that are outside your profitable calling range as well. And in this case, I think 7-6 suited is very much inside a profitable calling range, so I chose to call here. And I flop a double gutter on an extremely innocuous flop. There's seemingly almost nothing in the way of draws with legitimate hands, so it's a very, very dry board, and take chip checks. So now, the way that I choose to play the hand is very much a function of the opponents in the hand. Take chip doesn't fool around that much, and he also gives me a lot of respect. I think I'm up considerably on him. Over the course of our lifetime, I've just happened to sort of get lucky that when I've bluffed, he's folded, and when he has had a hand to call me down with, I've been at the top of my range in hands and stuff. So when he's usually gives me respect, and he doesn't fool around too much. So I figure that unless he's got a set, I should be able to win this from him, independent of Kung Fu Monk, by a second barrel. If I fire once and then he calls, and almost regardless of the turn card, I'll fire a second time, and I should be able to fold most of his holdings on this board. But he's the less relevant part of this hand. The more relevant part is Kung Fu Monk. Kung Fu Monk, I think, has kind of a leak in his game. He's a very good player. He's actually done quite well against me, I think. But one leak that he has is he raises too lightly, especially when he was the pre-flop aggressor. But then, and rightly so, doesn't defend those raises. So what happens is he's, if faced with a bet here, I expect him to raise any 9, 9-6 suited or anything. But even hands like ace-5 and things like that, he just routinely raises those hands. Makes him a little bit difficult to play marginal hands against if I take a donk leading line. But when I have big hands, I can really blow up pots like this. Now in this case, I don't have any hand yet. I have 7 high, but I have a very, very deceptive draw. So this is a situation in which, check calling is certainly a reasonable alternative, as is check raising. But here, if I lead, I think I'm gonna. If Kung Fu Monk has a hand that he can continue with, he's likely to raise. Like any hand that he chooses to not fold when he's led into on this board, he'll probably raise. That's the kind of player he is. Maybe a hand like Ace-3 or something, he'll just call. But I expect him to raise hands like 4-5 and things like that. Meanwhile, that will also protect me against take chip if the action goes that way. If I lead and Kung Fu Monk raises, now take chip is going to fold all but his very good holdings here. So that was my idea here. And now when you add in the fact that, so there's a couple different ways that the hand can go. I lead, Kung Fu Monk folds, which he'll do if he's got complete air. And then take chip either folds, which is perfectly fine if I take it down right now, or he calls. And if he calls, most cards I can fire a second barrel, take chip knowing that I'm fired the flop into 2, and especially into Kung Fu Monk, who tends to be a little bit of a calling station. Or, well, I should say a not folding station. He doesn't call as much as he raises. No, that's going to legitimize my range in take chip's mind. And considering what his pre-flop range is for just calling a min raise and then calling my bet here, there's probably not a lot with which he can continue, and just about the entire deck is going to be good for me to keep barreling. And if he does call me again on the turn, I can make a decision on the river based on what comes, and of course I've got the 8 outs to hit my hand as well as the backdoor flush draw. That's one way the hand could play out. The second way is if I lead and Kung Fu Monk raises, then take chip is going to fold, and then I can play the hand in a profitable situation against Kung Fu Monk, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then the third way is if I get called in one or both spots, and then I'm looking to hit my hand, and if I get called in both spots, if I lead and Kung Fu Monk calls and take chip calls, then I'm more looking to hit my hand. I'll probably choose to fire a second barrel as well, because that's how I would play a big hand here. What am I trying to say here? Hopefully get 2 folds, but otherwise, my hand still plays pretty profitably. The nice thing about this board is you're hard pressed to find, if I just get called, there's not too many cards rather, that I'm not going to have a profitable second barrel on. Now, all that being said, if I do get check raised by take chip, he's going to be very strong here, which is a good thing because we are so deep that if he check raises me, and he's super strong, he can almost never have 2 pair on this board, so check raise is likely to be a set. I'm certainly going to call, and I've got such a well-hidden draw that if I hit it, I'm likely to make a lot of money off him. And I can call that check raise in position, and depending on how much he bets and what the turn card is, I could call again on the turn as well, looking to hit a really big hand just because the implied odds are potentially very, very big here. So, with that in mind, I think that leading is a far superior play given the specific dynamics of the players that I described than checking to call or checking to raise. So that's what I did, and sure enough, Kung Fu Monk raises and take chip folds. Now, this is probably the most favorable result for me, simply because this is now, Kung Fu Monk raising full. Take chip may have had complete air, but when facing this action, I mean, he's going to have to be very strong to continue, like pocket tens plus, I would think. So, it gets rid of all of his medium strength hands, which are, of course, currently still better than mine. And now I get to play this hand against Kung Fu Monk, and he's not that deep. He started the hand with 2,500, so whatever that is, in 125 big blinds. And the nice thing is, here's where I can exploit the gap in his play. And this is, when you get to high stakes, most players are pretty, I mean, I guess, I don't know if you call this high stakes or medium stakes, but whatever. Most players are pretty technically sound. So in order to be a winner, you have to really exploit imbalances in your opponent's plays and imbalances in their frequencies while trying to maintain your own balance in yours so that you're not exploitable. And in this case, Kung Fu Monk has a very big gap, and that is that his raising range when led into is so much bigger than his defending range when facing a bet 3-bet, because when he's facing a bet 3-bet, he's really not going to continue unless he's extremely, when I bet 3-bet this board, I'm representing tremendous strength, and the nice thing about this board is it appears so innocuous, and that's the most important point of this hand, by the way. I kind of glossed it over, but I want to restate it because it's so important. The board looks so innocuous that it doesn't look like I have too much in the way of semi-bluffing. Like, this is very different than if the board was like Jack 10, 7, 2 suited. If that was the case, and I bet 3-bet, I wouldn't expect him to fold like a hand like Ace Jack or anything, just because there's so many more hands I could be semi-bluffing. But on a board like this, when I bet 3-bet, it's, I'm never doing that, taking that line with Ace 9. So I'm representing a tremendously strong hand. And given the paucity of draws on this board, it takes out all the draws, or almost all the draws, and we know that I've got a very sneaky draw here. And since it takes out all the draws, it strengthens my range. And he's smart enough to realize that, and all of a sudden a hand like, Jack 9 or whatever he may have shrivels up in his hand. So that's, and it's a particularly good play in this game. I mean, I think it would be a good play against most players in this spot, again, because it doesn't look like there's too many draws. So because of that, a line that goes bet 3-bet is going to be one in which my range is very strong, and because my range is very strong, they're gonna recognize that because of the lack of draws. Again, as opposed to a draw heavy board where I can have the big hands as well as the big draws. So therefore, one pair hands, don't look very good anymore. Plus, they can't have draws themselves to continue with. So it would be good against any player, but in particular, it's very, very good against Kung Fu Monk, simply because he just raises too much. Instead of calling with hands that he should be calling when led into on this board, 9, 7 suited, Ace 5, etc. He raises with all those, and because of that, I want to punish that gap between his raising range and his bet 3-bet defending range by exploiting the very large amount of fold equity that I should have here. So I'm re-raising. Now, the only question is how much. Well, the thing is, I want to make it look like I want him in. At the same time, I want to raise an amount that will never look like it's a bluff to him. And so basically, I'm going to raise an amount that makes it clear that I'm committing my stack while still not just like shoving, because then it looks kind of weak. So of course, once I take a bet 3-bet line, starting with 120 big blind effective stacks, I'm never folding if he shoves. So I don't have to worry about saving myself some money left behind. So at the same time, in these situations, if I were to make it like 1,300 or something, it just really looks kind of weak. Looks like I'm, just trying to jam in there, and then he may be more likely to put me on, a hand like I have, or 4-6 or something like that. Excuse me. So I re-raise to this amount, which is a very large raise, but still palatable. Roughly the amount that I would be raising here if I had a set. God, I hope my hiccups don't bother you guys. I may take a break here in a second after I finish this hand and get some water. Jeez, I'm sorry about this. Anyway, so I re-raise, and he folds. So, pretty straightforward hand in terms of how it went. But the point is, I just want to point out that the specific dynamics that made the play better and better. One is take chip, likely to give me a lot of respect. Not the kind of player to just foolishly stick around with a hand that's not going to play well. EV-wise. Excuse me, guys. These hiccups are getting bad. I'm just going to pause the video for a second and get some water. Okay, I'm back. So it's nice to have a dynamic where if I bet, Kung Fu Monk is likely to either fold or raise. He just doesn't have enough of a calling range, in my opinion. And that way, I end up either having take chip out of the equation or playing the hand only against take chip, which is good because I'm relying on fold equity. This is going to be a board that I should have a profitable at least 2-barrel and maybe even 3. And when Kung Fu Monk does raise, his ranges are such that I should have a lot of fold equity for the reasons that I explained in re-raising. And if I don't, I have decent equity to make my hand, and I'm going to be 40% or whatever, 35% or whatever, which isn't. It's not a catastrophe if I do have to get it all in. So, I guess that's it for this hand. I will go on to the next one now. Okay, so the next hand's another 10-20 hand. This is going to be one in which I'm going to use an overbet. And as most of you know, I very rarely use overbets. I know that other players do use them effectively. I just haven't been able to convince myself that they're really a valuable part of the game that can be used effectively. But every once in a while, an opportunity shows up, and whether it's an overbet for value or as a bluff, and I'd like to go over one such situation. So this guy Magma82, who's one of the few players that I have been playing with in 10-20 games that I'd never seen at this point, he opens, and I am going to call in the big blind with 8-6 suited, and the other two players fold, and I flop a flush draw, and he checks to me, so obviously I'm going to bet this. You could occasionally check these back because I think Jiggy did a video where he checks back a hand like this, because then you have all kinds of disguise if you do hit your flush. However, this is a situation in which when he, as the pre-flop raiser, checks, I'm likely to have a lot of fold equity, because usually if he's checking here, he's either completely giving up with a pocket pair below the 10 or something like that, or he'll have a hand like, I don't know, ace queen or something like that I should be able to get him off with a couple of barrels. So if on a board like this, even a hand like pocket aces is not really that comfortable, and depending on the feeling that I get, this is the kind of situation that I may choose to 3-barrel. So I think I'm giving up too much by checking back on this particular board when it's heads up. So I decide to bet. And he check calls, which sort of confirms my read that he's likely to be sort of weak. But now he leads when the 4 straight comes. So this is a situation, it's a really bizarre spot, for him to be doing that with, especially with that size, with anything other than the jack. So it's and also many hands that he would check call that flop with will contain a jack, right? Because most of the hands that aren't, the nuts, ace jack, or two pair plus, but that can call on that board is going to involve the other card being a jack. King jack, queen jack, 10 jack, pocket jacks. All of the other ones are going to be hands that he would have probably led. King queen, all that stuff. And so it's very, very likely the check call on the flop, in combination with the lead on the turn. So the thing is, he's giving me tremendous odds here. I have to call 122 into a pot of 463. So even if I don't have any additional implied odds, it's a pretty easy call. And so of course, I'm not expecting my straight to be good if I hit the 7. But still, I've got 9 outs to the flush, and so I'm getting the right price to draw to just the 9 outs without implied odds. And the nice thing is, if I do hit, I absolutely expect to get a river bet paid, simply because I think that he almost always has a jack in the spot. Again, even independently of his turn lead, just the check call on the flop is like the overwhelming majority of hands that would check call this flop will contain a jack. I guess there's the hands like ace queen and stuff too. It'll be ace king, ace queen, and then maybe pocket aces, and then all the hands that have a jack in them. It's a big majority of hands, and now he leads, which sort of confirms that. So it's a good spot for me, because if I hit a diamond on the river, it's not going to be very easy for him to get off his hand, and I think that it might even go he bets and I raise, and if not, if he checks, and we'll almost certainly call a bet. So pretty easy call for me here. Also, because of the likelihood that he has a jack, of course, raising here is pretty stupid. So I call. And the river is an interesting card. I had no intention of bluffing if I missed. Again, consistent with my read that he had a jack. However, the river pairs the top card on the board, and it's a situation where and he checks, and it's a situation where I think he's just always, he has a jack such a large percentage of the time here. And when I bet the flop and then called a bet on the turn, it's going to really look to him, especially the small bet that he made on the turn, it's really going to look to him like I have a hand like, King 10 or King Queen or something like that. Furthermore, if it was just King X, he's not going to expect me to bet the river. But this is a very good opportunity for me, specifically because it's a king. I wouldn't do it on any other card. But because it's a king, it makes me so many full houses. Obviously, if I had actually had a set, I would play it this way as well. Betting the flop and then just calling the turn. So now, and a hand like Queen 10 or something would probably just be folded on the turn. So basically, that king fills up basically all of my hands that I can have here, except for the flush draws. So now, he's in a situation where this is sort of leveling. He knows that I know that he has a jack, and I'm going to bet anyway. Now, that being said, many players will just call anyway. If I bet like 450, because it's like, they have a straight. You know what I mean? But I think this is a really good spot for an overbet, because it's the kind of bet that I think he would expect me to make with a full house, thinking that, he's not going to fold a jack, so I may as well bet as much as I can. So I think that if I do bet like 450, he may just make a crying call. But if I bet a lot more, I'm basically telegraphing that I'm not afraid of the jack. And as such, I'm gambling that he's, even though I didn't know this player, he is playing 10-20. I'm gambling that he's good enough to actually fold a jack, because against my range here, when that king hits, I am going to be full a lot. But I do think that the whole point, the main reason why I chose this hand for a video, is I think it's really important to actually make this bet and overbet. So that is what I did. And again, you also don't want to make it go sort of crazy, because if I made it like 1500 or something, like if I shoved on him, then it's like, first of all, I'm risking more, so I'm getting a worse price on my bluff. And second of all, it actually looks a little suspicious. I think 700 looks like an amount I'm just trying to squeeze out a little bit more, because there's 585 in the pot, and I'm getting greedy and trying to get that little bit extra against his quote unquote obvious jack. That's what I want to portray, and I think 700 is a really good amount to make it look like that's what I'm doing. And so that's what I did. And he tanked for a little bit and he folded. So I guess that's it. I mean, it was fairly straightforward hand, but it was a very, very a spot where I think an overbet was required, and also would have been an opportunity lost if I didn't. I was never going to bluff, like I said, when I called the 122 on the turn. I wasn't going to bluff most rivers, but the king was just simply too good of an opportunity to pass up. And I think it's important for you guys to be able to, for all of us, to be able to have our plans be malleable and fluid, and when something happens to change them, in this case the king on the river, to be able to think on your feet and work it to your advantage. And in this case I did that, and I think the overbet was necessary to my play. Or at least made a higher EV. Maybe he would have folded anyway, but I think that the overbet was very necessary. So, okay, onwards and upwards. Okay, so for the next couple hands I'm going to do, I am going to talk about a couple of hands that involve taking advantage of capped ranges in the opponents, and exploiting them accordingly. So this is a 5-10 game. X Bang Bang 07X, who's just about the best player at that limit, or one of the top 3 in my opinion. He raises, and Smitty, who's a good, solid, very good player, also one of the best, he calls in position. I would put him a little bit not as skilled as X Bang Bang, but again, very capable of just about anything, and plays very well. And neither of them, both of them can fold a big hand. So I call. I defend in the small blind with Queen 10 suited. Pretty standard play for me here. And I flop nothing. So I check. The idea is, of course, to, and X Bang Bang has a pretty decent opening range, and Smitty has a decent calling range. They're not overly loose. So this is obviously a standard check and fold hand. Don't worry, that's not going to be that boring. I probably wouldn't make that into a video if I checked and folded. So I check, and it checks around. And the replayer has Dino Supremo checking on the button without cards, but it was Smitty, of course. Now the turn is a king, giving me a flush draw. The king is not a great card, because when X Bang Bang is always going to be betting any pocket pair on that board, on that flop. Maybe not like 2s or 3s. I think even 3s, since it's a gut shot, I think he would be betting there. So he basically, it's pretty clear that he does not have a pocket pair to start the hand. And if he doesn't have a pocket pair to start the hand, a lot of his hands are going to contain a king in them. So the king is going to pair him up quite often. And when Smitty checks back, closing the action, he's also going to have a lot of hands like King Queen and stuff like that as well. So I check, and X Bang Bang now bets, and Smitty folds. So now here's where I take advantage. X Bang Bang, as I've mentioned, is a very good player, and he's not gonna monkey off his stack in bad situations. Now, I do have equity because I picked up a flush draw, but this is a situation where it's very, very good for me to use the fact that his range is capped at probably ace-king. On this innocuous board, he's almost never, there's absolutely no way that any hand that is now better than ace-king at the moment is not betting the flop. He's always going to be betting the flop with those hands. So because of that, I know that the absolute top of his range here is ace-king. And by the way, it's perfectly possible that he was bluffing now. He's often going to have a king, but he also has some air in his range, like ace-jack and stuff like that, that's going to try to represent the king after check through. Now, the fact that he has a capped range by itself is not enough for me to go crazy. But I've got a few other things working in my favor. First of all, of course, I do have additional equity. I've picked up the flush draw. If I check raise, he's never gonna, he's never gonna re-raise me. He may just call, and then of course I can hit my hand. But also, this is exactly the line that I would take if I had flopped a straight or two pair or a set. And the thing that works, the second component of the hand that works really well. The first component is that my opponent has a capped range that's capped at ace-king. The second component of the hand that works very well for me is that flop was extremely coordinated and hit the kind of range that I would be splashing around. I'm going to be calling with my 8-5 suiteds and of course pocket sevens, pocket sixes, but I'm also going to be calling, as you guys know, in the small blind with hands like 7-6 suited and 6-4 suited. So there's so many hands that blast, the flop hammers me, that I would definitely play this way because, with check raise on the flop, but then when the flop checks through, there's no reason not to check again on the turn because obviously I'm going to know if I have a value hand, again, that my opponents are capped at a king, so I may as well let them try to catch up, and if they have a king, I'm certainly going to be facing a bet anyway. So if I had a big hand, I'm definitely going to take the same line, but, and so I use that to my benefit. And the point, again, is that flop, if you look at it, 7-6-4, is indeed the kind of flop that I would sort of lurk and go for a check raise. And if I whiffed a check raise on the flop, I would go for, on a turn card that is nowhere near the flop, I would try again for the check raise. And having logged many hands with X Bang Bang 07, he knows that about me, and so I can use that in my favor. So I'm going to check raise here. And again, I expect him to be able to get away from all hands, including ace-king here, because it's not going to do well against my range in this spot, and he knows that, and he's a good enough player to just fold it. He's not going to be one of these guys that, I have a pair, let me close my eyes and call down. He's playing against a range, and in this case, it's so again, just to summarize, part A, his range is capped at ace-king. He cannot have a monster himself, and part B, the flop not only often hits me hard, but the board runs out in a way that I would in fact check twice, to try to trap if I did have that monster that I'm representing. Especially because the flop's a rainbow too, so I don't have to worry about giving a free card to some kind of flush draw or something like that. So I would indeed play a big hand like this, and I'm often going to have a big hand, so I can use that to my benefit. And of course, finally, I have the flush draw to fall back on just in case I'm wrong. So with all that in mind, I'm going to have a lot of fold equity, and I raise, and sure enough, he folds his hand. So a good example of how to utilize when your opponent has a capped range. So let's do another one. And now this is going to be another example of a hand in which I exploited a capped range. I may not have made the best decision on the turn in this hand, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether it was a good or bad decision, but we'll get to it in a second. So I open pocket fives under the gun, and Busto three bets me from the button. This is a situation where I'm going to call. It's not a great EV spot, but I think that he's giving me. He's not three betting very much. It's only 55 more, much smaller three bet than most people do, and that coupled with my sort of confidence in myself to sort of feel my way through. I think I'm doing well enough that I can call this this small three bet. I would not call in this spot against a good player, and Busto Soon is a decent player if he had made it a little more. But this is enough that I feel like I can play my hand in a profitable manner, such that the call of 55 into a pot of 126 is plus EV. So I call, and the flop comes pretty bad. I mean, I'm still ahead of overcards, but I'm not ahead in a situation where I could profitably attack this board, obviously. So I check with the idea of just folding to a bet here, but he checks back, and now the turn brings a straight flush on the board, and it makes me my straight, the idiot end. So now I'm ahead of diamondless overpairs, as well as overcards. So my hand has some nominal value, certainly has showdown value. If it goes check, 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 I'll expect to be good. And that's what I want now. My hand has more showdown value than it did before. So I check again. And now he bets. And here's where I'm not sure if my play is correct. Maybe I should just be folding here. But here's the thing. I believe that if he had a big diamond in his hand, certainly if it was the ace of diamonds, I think he would have bet the flop. And if he had the 10 of diamonds, he's going to bet the flop, especially if he had a three-betting hand. The 10 of diamonds, it may already be a straight or a flush, because the hands that he might three-bet that contain the 10 of diamonds, there's almost none of them when you think about it. Like, what hands would he be three-betting against me opening under the gun that contain the 10 of diamonds that he's not c-betting? Pretty much nothing. So now it's a little bit of a peculiar bet, because I just don't expect, like, I just would expect all his big diamonds to bet, and now if he has a hand like pocket tens without a diamond, or like, another such weak-ish hand that does beat me, I would expect him to check again. So the bet is a little bit fishy. So actually, I do agree with my play now that I'm talking through it. I think that calling on the turn, as I did, is the right play. And I think what's going to happen a lot of the time is after I call on the turn, the river's going to go check, check, and I'm going to show down the best hand. So that's what I do. And then the river pairs the 7. So I check again, and he bets again. And I don't think I can call, and it's a pretty big bet here. But here's where I can exploit again. His range is capped. What is it capped at? Probably, he could conceivably have the ace of diamonds. I think that's reasonable. But again, I would expect if he had the ace of diamonds in his hand that he would be betting the flop. So you discount the ace of diamonds, he could certainly be doing this with like the king of diamonds. Um, you know, pocket kings with the king of diamonds or something like that is pretty consistent with the play of this hand. However, so his range is capped though. He can't have a straight flush just because I don't think that he would be three betting with a hand that contains the five of diamonds, especially because I have pocket fives. So, if it's not ace five of diamonds, there's really not, or 5-4 of diamonds. There's not really a hand that he would do that with. And if he did do it with 5-4 of diamonds or ace five of diamonds, he's absolutely betting the flop, of course. And so because of that, you can't put him on either end of the straight flush, because any hand with the 10 of, there's just not hands with the 5 of diamonds that he could have that he's not betting the flop. Same thing for the 10 of diamonds. He also can't have a full house because he would have bet any set on the flop. And if he turned the set, he's not betting that. He would just check it, because it would appear that there's nothing, if there's pocket sixes or 7-6, there's no way he's betting that. So he can't have a full house, he can't have a straight flush. So his range is sort of capped at, let's call it the ace high flush, even if we assume that he's not betting the ace of diamonds. Well, if you look at my range now, my range has the range of hands that I would play this way and then shove on him has that crushed, because if you think about it, I opened under the gun and then I called a 3-bet and then check called on the turn. What am I doing that? What am I check calling on that board on the turn with? Well, I don't know if he's even going to think that I'm going to be doing that with as weak of a hand as I have here. He may think I have diamondless tens or something like that, or something, something of that neighborhood. But it's if you think about, I don't think that I need to spell it out categorically for you, but if you think about the range of hands with which I can play the way that I did until the turn, and then now jam the river, there's really not much, because if I did have a big diamond, like the queen of diamonds or something like that, he's probably gonna believe that I can just call there and I won't need to turn it into a bluff. Whereas my hand is crap now, okay? Of course I can't just call with it anymore. But at the same time, if I did in fact flop a set, it's very possible that I just whiffed on a check raise on the flop. Then that ridiculous turn came, and so I decided to just check call, and now the board pairs, so I can go after it. Also, if in fact I did have a straight flush, I could absolutely slow play it here. And, both ends of the straight flush are very much in my range, because I would, there's no reason for me to have bet them on the flop. I could be waiting for a check raise or just a check call to trap him, since he was the pre-flop aggressor. So all of the value hands that have him crushed are in my range. And there's not a lot of bad hands in my range, because what am I 3-betting with pre-flop? Calling a 3-bet with pre-flop, and then calling when he bets that turn. Look at the board on the turn and assign a range to me and tell me what percentage of that range doesn't have the ace of diamonds crushed when I shove here. So once again, this is an example of a very important utilization of capped ranges. His range, if you go through the entire story of the hand from beginning to end, his range is very much capped at the ace of diamonds, whereas my range consists of both straight flushes and all the full houses as well, and all of which I would play this way for value. Furthermore, it's also very hard to put me on a bad hand. So even though my range, even if I was in a situation where his range is capped and I could have the monsters, if I can have a lot of bluffs too, he can still find a call. He can turn like the ace of diamonds into a bluff catcher. But in this case, there's just not a lot of hands I can have that aren't good, that I need to turn into a bluff. And so therefore I think this is a really good spot for me to shove on him, which is what I did. And he folded. So a second example there of a capped range. And I think with that I'll end this video. I think I'm around 45 minutes or so. These hand analysis videos take a lot longer to make, so hope you don't mind that they're a little bit 10-15 minutes shorter than my other videos. Do please give me feedback as always. Hope you guys enjoy this. Post any questions you want in the in the forums, and I guess that's it. This is Niman Kenkre for BlueFirePoker.com. See you guys.